Welcome to Therapy Inspired podcast. As therapists, we have a unique view of the world. We hold a space for grief and trauma, and yet we also get to witness resilience and healing, all while being human ourselves. We hope to share helpful psychoeducation with our insights from our world as psychotherapists. And now a disclaimer. We'll be talking about things related to therapy. However, listening or engaging with this podcast does not equate to a therapist-client relationship. And while we may discuss insights from working with various clinical issues, we don't reference specific cases. Hi, my name is Darby Crosby, and I'm a registered psychotherapist. I'm on the Registry for Marriage and Family Therapy. I have a virtual clinic in Ontario where I see individuals, couples, and families, and I also offer supervision to other clinicians.
Hi, I'm Camila Osman. I'm a registered social worker and a psychotherapist. I have a practice here in Bowmanville, and I see clients virtually throughout Ontario. Welcome back to Therapy Inspired. In our last episode, we explored how the nervous system runs the show, how our body holds on to stress, trauma, and emotional experiences, and they get stored in our body. Today, we're diving into shame, one of the most powerful emotions that also gets stored in our body. Shame isn't just a thought or a feeling, it lives in our nervous system, our muscles, our postures, our reactions. It impacts the way we show up in relationships, at work, in parenting, and even how we see ourselves. We're going to break down why shame feels so heavy, how it shows up in the body, and what are some strategies you can use to heal from holding on to shame.
So let's talk first of all about what shame is. Shame is very different from guilt, and a lot of times people confuse the two. So guilt is something around I did something bad, so it's action based. It's something that I have done. Whereas shame is it's more sort of self based. I am bad, or I can't be good at this or that. Right? I'm terrible at these things. It is a deep rooted belief that something is wrong with us at our very core. Often we've learned a lot of things in our childhood through a lot of the criticism that we received, or even if there was some emotional neglect, or in some cases, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing, some cultural and family expectations also lead to children feeling a little bit more shame about their experiences. And shame can also come from trauma, mistakes, relationships, social messaging, and even internal expectations.
Mhm. One of the differences I'll mention there, Darby, in that definition of like guilt versus shame is that guilt, we can often think of a path that we can rectify that. I feel guilty about this, so I can apologize and take accountability. I can shift this. But shame is more immovable. It's more, as you said, like more self-based. I feel this, and this is, embodied in my body. And it really represents we've held on to those thoughts and feelings that go along with I'm feeling that guilt, I'm feeling bad and negative about myself, and now I'm feeling this sense of shame within my body. And so it's deeper and, as we said, heavier and not actionable. There isn't anything that we can put into play that's going to shift that shame in the same way that we can make amends with guilt and shift it with a simple acknowledgement. Shame
Mhm.
does live in the body. It doesn't just exist in the mind. It gets stored in how we move about in the world, our thinking patterns as well. Common physical signs of shame include a slouched or slumped posture, avoiding eye contact. We may notice tightness in the chest, throat, or stomach. We may feel small or want to hide, like an actual physical shrinking. Chronic tension, fatigue, digestive issues, nervous system dysregulation. Shame can often trigger a freeze or a fawn response. And so freeze is when we freeze in terms of interrelationship conversations. We don't know how to act in certain circumstances. And fawn is where we try to people please and win over other people. The brain can often see shame as a threat, and that's where it activates that survival mechanism of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And so sometimes we may avoid, as I mentioned the fight and flight, sometimes we might avoid situations that may make us feel overly seen. I don't want to public speak, or I don't want to go into that social situation because I feel shame of how I show up or how I interact. And because of that survival system activation, that's where we can feel that paralyzing feeling. It can feel like it actually shuts us down.
And in our last episode, we did talk a lot about sort of the polyvagal theory and how the vagus nerve, which is one of the longest nerves in our body, that it's involved in our feelings of shame, safety, and connection. So a lot of times when we are feeling threatened, right? Fight, fight, flee, freeze, or fawn, it speaks to that, or the vagus nerve is involved. And if we don't process our shame, if we don't sort of figure out where it's coming from or how we can sort of modify it, it does get stored in our body, and then things just get stored and stored and stored. Shame sort of keeps us stuck in self-doubt, self-criticism, and in some cases even perfectionism. It can lead to people pleasing, as Camilla just mentioned a little bit before. And also, it can create sort of this vulnerability within us where we will not speak out or we will not talk about things because we're very fearful that somebody's going to judge us or see us as being not a good person or not appropriate in certain ways. With in relationships, shame can also play its role in not being able to set boundaries or over apologizing or not feeling worthy of love, right? So, if my partner does nice things for me and I don't feel worthy of love, then I may behave in a way that may make them feel that, I'm not appreciating or they're not important to me. In some cases, shame can fuel that perfectionism over achievement because you always have to prove your worthiness. In other cases, what happens is that we end up being sort of withdrawal, we isolate ourselves, we struggle with those sort of feelings of depression and those feelings of anxiety and imposter syndrome, right? I'm just not good enough, I can't do this. And in some cases, our culture, our society also tells us what's good and what's bad. And if we sort of hear that on one level and see other people doing something, or you won't even do something that's culturally or socially a little bit out of the norm, that creates or can create a lot of shame. And then internalized shaming is where I'm doing it to myself, so to speak. Like I'm saying I'm bad or I'm not good enough in this personal regard. So I can't be a good parent. I can't be a good partner, those kinds of things. Whereas externalizing shame is more that the society or the people around us are telling us that, we're not enough. We can't do what we need to do.
I'd say ultimately that external shame becomes that internalized shame. Many of us aren't born with shame. We may have, a temperament to be, let's say, hypervigilant, but that shame itself often is from that external messaging. And then, of course, that external piece, like you're saying, people can push us back into that box of feeling shame or control behaviors and choices by using and wielding shame almost as a bit of a weapon, as you mentioned, the social and cultural conditioning. That's what comes to my mind as well. So, what can actually help, Darby, when we're feeling the shame? If you're feeling any of those cues to shame being in your body, if you're working at overcoming any of those narratives, recognizing that that shame is there, notice what situations bring up that emotion for you, and how it shows up in your body. Are there people that induce more shame when they're around you? You feel like hiding more, or you feel like not sharing all of you. You're reducing your authenticity when you show up in these spaces or not owning all of your choices. Are there particular thoughts? So when I think of how I handle myself in this situation, or when I think of this misstep that I made, what are the thoughts? What are the situations? What are the people that activate the shame for you? And be mindful of the inner dialogue. Notice your self-talk. And so I know we've said this many times in past episodes. A lot can be shifted by mindfulness. And so being mindful of like what's the quality of the thoughts you're having. Are these thoughts you would say to a friend? Which brings me to a key piece in therapy that we talk about, self-compassion. And so are we being compassionate with ourselves in how we are talking to ourselves in our mind and how we're carrying ourselves in other spaces? Shame thrives with secrecy, and it thrives when we are being judgmental, critical of ourselves. And so by loving ourselves, by owning our choices, and accepting who we are, that self-kindness disrupts the ability of shame to be embodied so deeply in ourselves and in our nervous system. And so that acceptance, if you can think of like the acceptance, just relaxes all the muscles, all of the nervous system. It kind of says there isn't a fire here. There isn't, activation that we need to be ready for with that threat response. I accept, any shortcomings of myself. I accept, perceived shortcomings. I accept who I am, and I'm okay with my humanity. And that allows the nervous system to relax and that threat response to relax. And so in therapy, and on our own, when we're using strategies, we can use this as well. We call them bottom up and top down approaches. And so the bottom up, I think we've talked about this before, Darby. The bottom up are those body-based healings, the breath work, the grounding, the somatic practices. And we also talked about the SSP that you do. So the Safe and Sound protocol, that's by Stephen Porges and his research. And so we can use sound to activate that vagus nerve and create that calm in the brain and the body, because of that vagus nerve traveling throughout the body. And so there's lots in the body that we can use, as I mentioned, breath work as well. There's lots that we can use in the body to try to calm and shift the quality of thoughts to allow neurological, so actually what's happening in the brain, can create calm on that neurological level. Movement, yoga, shaking out the tension, a good, just kind of doing a good big shake can release some of that stored up shame we hold on to. And they've, studied this more, how trauma and emotion lives in the body. It lives in that muscle tension. And so shaking and activating that nervous system, that vagus nerve, can make a difference in releasing instead of holding on to that shame. And so, again, the bottom up is we're using the body to shift what's happening in the mind. And then the top down approaches are those mindset shifts, those narrative shifts, the self talk. I'm challenging that thought of I'm not enough and opening up to curiosity. I know that I struggle with this, or I'm not yet proficient in this, but I know that I'm putting forward my effort, or I know this is a skill set that takes time to cultivate. And so those mindset shifts, and mixing it with compassion, recognizing that shame is learned too. So this is what I was taught, but maybe this narrative or this value wasn't always accurate. Maybe, I'm allowed to have my voice in this space. Maybe I don't need to feel shame for that thing that I've always felt shame for. So changing some of that mindset can also be quite healing, doing that deeper narrative work. And then there's safety and connection. And as we connect with other people and feel acceptance in safe circles, and it's not that we all only need to rely on that external validation, but as we share vulnerably with people and allow them to see those parts of us that maybe we've kept hidden, that can also shift that allowing internally. And whether it's with people or on our own, shame cannot survive when we have safe, accepting spaces. And so talk with a trusted person, whether that's a therapist, a friend, or a partner. Rewrite those stories of shame through vulnerability and connection.
Mhm. And just as sort of some final thoughts again, shame can be really, really heavy, but it doesn't have to define you, right? You are not shame. So the first step is to recognize how it shows up in your body, like Camilla just mentioned, and to find the ways to sort of help ourselves heal, like with the self-compassion, regulating our nervous system, like Camilla was talking about, and create those safe connections. Safe connections are really sort of underestimated in terms of their value. Being able to talk to somebody who has a shared experience, being able to talk to somebody who has lived through it before can be a huge piece of understanding and self-acceptance in terms of what has sort of happened. So, if this episode has given you any kind of sort of tools or makes you feel that you resonate with something, try one shift. It doesn't matter. Try changing your self-talk or the way you're practicing body-based tools. This mean you have to sort of dance to the kitchen, like or whatever. Like shame loses its grip when we bring it to the light and we share it with other people. And, again, what we want to help people to do is to sort of continue their learning in terms of shame. So, self-compassion is a big thing. There's lots of information on the internet. Dr. Kristen Neff has talked a lot about self-compassion. And vulnerability and reframing shame is Brene Brown. That's a familiar name that most people know. So if you seek it out, seek those individuals out, you'll get some more information. And Camilla and I would like to really invite you sort of to try yoga or meditation or dance, or even try safe and sound protocol for your nervous system support. So our next episode, and I hope that you join us next week when we discuss finding the calm in chaos,
In
where we
two.
discuss how to manage the stressors in our daily lives.
Thanks.